Everything seems
Armed
to be in order
female
here.
police
Yes,
officers
the area is
tells
secure.
Palistian protester, "You are not to protest next to the horse." The morning began like any other working day in the city, but there was a quiet feeling in the air that something important was about to happen. Streets that were usually filled with rushing cars and loud horns slowly started to change. People gathered in small groups, standing on sidewalks, near bus stops, and at open corners. Some held small flags, others carried handmade signs with messages written in careful letters. Their faces showed emotion, but their behavior was calm. This was not a moment of chaos. It was a moment of expression. The protest was planned in advance, and many people had come with a clear purpose. They wanted to show support for Palestine and make their voices heard in a peaceful way. Some had traveled long distances, while others lived nearby and walked to the area. There were young people, older people, families, and individuals standing alone. Everyone had a different reason for being there, but they were united by a shared concern and a deep sense of responsibility to speak up. Police officers were already present before the crowd fully formed. They stood in lines, spaced carefully, watching the area and communicating quietly with each other. Their job was to make sure the protest remained peaceful and that no one got hurt. Among them were officers on foot and a few mounted officers sitting tall on large, trained horses. The horses were calm, used to crowds and noise, but they were still animals with strength and size that required space. One of the officers was a female police officer wearing full uniform. She had been trained for crowd control and public safety. Her posture was straight, and her eyes moved slowly across the crowd, observing faces, movements, and the general mood. She was standing beside her assigned horse, holding the reins firmly but gently. The horse shifted its weight from time to time, breathing steadily, aware of the noise and movement around it. The officer understood that protests were a normal part of public life. She had seen many before, some emotional, some loud, and some quiet. Her role was not to judge the message but to maintain safety. She knew that even peaceful gatherings could become dangerous if people moved too close to certain areas or ignored safety instructions. Horses, especially, needed space. A sudden sound or movement could cause them to react without warning. As the crowd grew, the sounds became louder but remained controlled. Chants rose together and then faded. Signs were lifted higher so others could see them. Some people recorded videos on their phones, while others simply stood still, listening and watching. The energy of the protest was strong but respectful. There was tension, but it was the tension of emotion, not of aggression. The female officer noticed how close some protesters were getting to the police line. Most kept a reasonable distance, but a few individuals moved forward, driven by emotion or curiosity. She stayed alert, watching carefully. Her training had taught her to notice small changes before they became problems. A step forward here, a raised voice there, these details mattered. Nearby, her horse lifted its head and turned slightly, responding to a sound from the crowd. The officer adjusted her grip on the reins and spoke softly to calm the animal. She knew that people often underestimated how sensitive horses could be. While they were trained, they were not machines. Keeping a safe distance was important for everyone involved. The protest continued to grow and more people arrived. Some joined the chants, while others stood quietly, holding signs close to their chest. The atmosphere felt heavy with emotion but still balanced. Police officers remained in place, forming a visible but controlled presence. They were not blocking voices, only guiding movement. The female officer glanced at the people nearest to her position. She could see determination in their faces, mixed with frustration and hope. She understood that many of them felt unheard and believed this protest was their chance to speak. She respected that feeling, even while staying focused on her duty. As time passed, the crowd pressed slightly closer. It was not intentional or aggressive, just the natural movement of people trying to see and be seen. The officer shifted her stance, making sure she and the horse remained in a safe position. She scanned the area again, checking for anything unusual. In the distance, city sounds continued as normal. Cars passed on nearby roads, shops remained open, and pedestrians stopped to watch for a moment before moving on. Life went on, even as this moment unfolded. The contrast between everyday routines and the emotional weight of the protest was clear. The officer felt the familiar pressure of responsibility. One wrong moment could change everything. Her goal was simple: keep everyone safe, including the protesters, her fellow officers, and herself. She knew that calm actions and clear communication were the best tools she had. As chants echoed through the street once more, she took a slow breath and tightened her focus. The protest was still peaceful, but moments like these could change quickly. She stayed ready, aware, and steady, standing beside her horse as the crowd continued to grow and emotions continued to rise. This was only the beginning. The day was still young and many moments were yet to come. As the protest continued, one man slowly moved forward from the middle of the crowd. He was not loud and he was not pushing anyone. His steps were calm, but his face showed deep emotion. He held a small sign in his hand, worn at the edges, as if it had been carried for a long time. He had come to the protest with a clear purpose. He wanted to stand where he could be seen, where his message would not disappear into the crowd. He believed peaceful presence mattered. For him, standing closer meant being closer to justice, closer to being heard. He did not notice how close he was getting to the police line. His focus was on the moment, on the voices around him, on the weight in his chest that had brought him there in the first place. Around him, other protesters were chanting softly. Some looked at him as he stepped forward, but no one stopped him. It felt natural to move closer, like the crowd itself was gently guiding him ahead. He did not intend to challenge anyone. He only wanted to stand his ground in a calm way. The female officer noticed him almost immediately. Her eyes followed his movement as he stepped nearer. She could tell he was not aggressive, but she was trained to act before a situation became risky. She looked down briefly at the horse beside her. The animal had shifted again, sensing movement close to its side. Horses were trained, but they still reacted to space and sound. The officer felt the reins tighten slightly in her hand as the horse adjusted its position. She knew that people often did not understand how dangerous it could be to stand too close. A sudden movement, a loud noise, or even another person brushing past could cause the horse to step sideways or lift its front legs. That kind of movement could hurt someone without warning. The man stopped just a short distance from the horse. He looked up, noticing the height of the animal for the first time. It was taller than he expected, powerful and alert. For a brief moment he hesitated, but his emotions pushed him to stay where he was. He believed he was not doing anything wrong. He was not touching the horse. He was not shouting. He was only standing. People nearby began to notice the moment forming. A few phones lifted quietly, recording without sound. The chants softened as attention shifted. The air felt tighter, like everyone sensed that something important was about to happen. The officer took a step forward, placing herself slightly between the horse and the man. Her posture remained straight, professional, and controlled. She did not rush. She did not raise her voice. Her training guided her movements. She spoke clearly, telling him that he could not stand next to the horse and needed to move back for safety reasons. Her words were firm but calm. She was not attacking his message or his presence. She was giving a clear instruction meant to protect everyone. The man felt a wave of frustration rise inside him. He had expected resistance from authority, but hearing it directly still hurt. He looked around, feeling suddenly exposed. In his mind, he wondered why his position was a problem when others were allowed to stand nearby. He felt singled out, even though the officer's tone was neutral. He tried to explain himself, saying he was protesting peacefully and not causing harm. His voice was steady, but emotion was clear in his expression. He believed strongly in his right to stand there to show support without being pushed aside. For him, stepping back felt like stepping away from his voice. The officer listened, her eyes steady. She did not interrupt him. She had learned that listening could calm situations more than force ever could. When he finished speaking, she repeated her instruction, explaining again that the horse needed space and that safety rules applied to everyone equally. The horse shifted again, lifting its head and letting out a quiet breath. The officer placed a calming hand on its side, reassuring it. She could feel the tension not just in the crowd but in the ground beneath her boots. Moments like this were fragile. A single misunderstanding could change everything. The man looked at the horse once more. This time, he noticed the small movements, the flick of the ears, the steady but powerful breathing. He realized that the officer was not making a personal request. She was doing her job. Still, the feeling of being told where he could and could not stand stayed heavy in his chest. Around them, the crowd waited. No one shouted. No one pushed. The silence itself felt loud. People watched closely, hoping the moment would pass without trouble. Some felt sympathy for the man. Others understood the officer's position. The protest, though peaceful, held many emotions moving at the same time. The officer remained calm, repeating her instruction one final time. She did not threaten. She did not move aggressively. Her body language stayed open but firm. She trusted that clarity and patience would guide the outcome. After a few long seconds, the man slowly nodded. The tension in his shoulders softened slightly. He took a small step back, then another. It was not defeat, but a decision made with difficulty. He turned his body slightly, creating distance between himself and the horse. The officer acknowledged his movement with a brief nod. She did not smile, but her expression softened just enough to show respect. The horse relaxed, settling into a steadier stance. The moment began to loosen its grip on the crowd. The man walked back toward the group he had come from. As he rejoined them, a few people placed supportive hands on his shoulder. He still held his sign firmly. His message had not changed. Only his position had. The chant slowly returned, rising again into the air. The protest continued, its rhythm restored. The officer stepped back into her original position beside the horse, her attention still sharp but her breathing steady. Both sides remained where they were, carrying their roles, their beliefs, and their responsibilities. The moment had passed without escalation, leaving behind a quiet reminder of how close tension and calm could stand side by side. The day continued, and the story moved forward, shaped by choices made in seconds but felt for much longer. After the man stepped back, the space between the police line and the crowd felt wider, even though it was only a few steps. The air slowly relaxed, but the emotions inside people did not disappear. They simply settled deeper. The protest continued, but everyone remained more aware of their surroundings. Small movements now felt important, and every sound seemed clearer. The man stood among other protesters, holding his sign close to his chest. His heart was still beating fast. What had just happened stayed in his mind. He replayed the officer's words again and again, trying to understand them fully. Part of him felt relieved that the situation did not turn worse. Another part still felt hurt. Being told to move, even for safety, had touched something sensitive inside him. Around him, people whispered softly. Some nodded in understanding. Others looked toward the police line with mixed expressions. No one wanted trouble. They wanted their voices heard without fear. The moment near the horse had reminded everyone how quickly a peaceful situation could become uncomfortable. The female officer remained at her position. Her face stayed calm, but inside, she was fully alert. She knew that moments like the one she had just handled could leave emotional marks. Her job was not only physical safety, but also keeping the situation emotionally balanced. She watched the crowd carefully, noticing how people shifted, how their faces changed, how their energy moved. She adjusted her stance slightly, keeping the reins secure. The horse beside her was calm now, breathing evenly. She spoke quietly to it again, using a soft tone meant to reassure. The animal responded by lowering its head a little, signaling comfort. That small response eased her mind. The protest sounds grew stronger again. Chants returned in waves, rising and falling together. Signs lifted higher, moving gently with the motion of arms. The message of the protest flowed forward again, no longer paused by uncertainty. People found their rhythm, and the gathering regained its shape. The man took a deep breath and joined the chants. His voice blended with others, no longer alone. Standing among people who shared his concern gave him strength. He realized that being part of the crowd did not make his message smaller. In some ways, it made it louder. He looked again toward the police line. This time he did not feel the same sharp frustration. He saw the officer standing straight, focused, not aggressive. He noticed how still she was, how controlled her movements were. It made him think about the responsibility she carried. Even though they stood on different sides, they were both present for reasons they believed were important. The officer noticed his glance but did not react. She had learned not to read too much into looks. Crowds communicated in many ways, and not all of them required response. Still, she remained aware. Awareness was her strongest tool. Time passed slowly. The sun shifted slightly in the sky, changing the light on the street. Shadows moved across the ground. The city continued its daily rhythm around the protest. People walked by, some stopping briefly, others passing without a second look. Life and protest existed side by side. Another group of protesters arrived, joining from a side street. They moved carefully, guided by volunteers who helped keep paths clear. The crowd grew again, but this time with more order. The earlier moment near the horse had made people more cautious. They respected the boundaries more clearly now. The officer communicated quietly with another officer nearby. They exchanged brief words, nothing dramatic, just updates. Everything remained under control. That was the goal. No sudden movements, no raised voices, calm presence over force. The man felt his emotions shift from frustration to determination. He realized that this experience, though uncomfortable, had not taken away his purpose. If anything, it had strengthened it. He wanted to continue standing, chanting, and showing support in a way that stayed peaceful and steady. A chant rose that spoke of hope and unity. It spread quickly through the crowd. Voices joined together, creating a strong sound that filled the street. The man joined in, his voice clear and steady. For a moment, he felt connected to everyone around him, as if they were all breathing together. The officer heard the chant clearly. She listened without reacting, her expression neutral. She had heard many chants before from many different groups. Her role was not to agree or disagree, but to make sure the moment stayed safe. Still, she recognized the power of collective voices. She knew how strong that feeling could be. The horse shifted slightly, responding to the vibration of sound through the ground. The officer adjusted again, maintaining balance and space. She remained focused, scanning the area for any signs of trouble. Nothing stood out. The crowd was loud but controlled. The man wiped his forehead and adjusted his grip on the sign. The paper felt warm from his hands. He looked around at the faces near him. Some were tired, some determined, some emotional. All of them were present, choosing to stand there instead of staying silent somewhere else. The moment near the horse became a quiet memory, already beginning to fade. It had not defined the protest. It had only shaped it slightly, reminding everyone of the thin line between tension and calm. As the protest continued, both the man and the officer stayed in their places, each holding their role. Neither had changed their beliefs, but both had gained a deeper understanding of the moment they were sharing. The street remained filled with voices, signs, and movement. The story was still unfolding, step by step, shaped by choices, patience, and the effort to remain calm in a space filled with strong emotion. As the protest moved deeper into the afternoon, the energy began to change in a quiet but noticeable way. The crowd was still strong, but people were growing tired. Standing for hours, chanting, holding signs, and staying alert required effort. Faces showed signs of fatigue, yet the purpose that had brought everyone there remained firm. Determination was still present, even as voices became slightly softer and movement slower. The man stood among the protesters, feeling the weight of time in his legs. He shifted his stance and stretched his shoulders, careful not to lose his place. The moment near the horse still stayed in his thoughts, but it no longer felt sharp. Instead, it had become something he reflected on. He realized how close emotion and misunderstanding could stand together, especially in a space filled with strong feelings. He looked around and noticed how people were helping each other. Someone shared water bottles. Another person helped an older man adjust his sign. These small acts reminded him why he had come. Protest was not only about shouting messages. It was also about standing together, supporting one another, and showing care even in disagreement. The female officer remained steady at her post. Her uniform felt heavier as the hours passed, but her focus did not weaken. She had learned how important consistency was in moments like these. If officers showed frustration or impatience, the crowd could sense it immediately. Calm behavior helped keep everything balanced. She scanned the area again, watching for changes. The crowd was large, but it remained peaceful. She could see that people were more aware of boundaries now. The space around the horse stayed clear. That awareness told her that the earlier moment had left an impact, not through force, but through communication. The horse stood quietly, its breathing slow and even. The officer gently adjusted the reins and gave the animal a short break by shifting its position slightly. She spoke softly again, using familiar words the horse recognized. The animal responded calmly, a sign of trust built through training and care. In the crowd, a new chant started, slower and deeper than before. It carried emotion rather than volume. The man joined in, feeling the meaning of the words settle inside him. He noticed that people were no longer pushing forward. Instead, they stood firmly where they were, grounded and focused. Media workers moved carefully along the edges, recording scenes and speaking quietly into cameras. The presence of attention from outside the protest added another layer of awareness. People knew their actions could be seen and remembered. That knowledge encouraged restraint. The officer noticed the cameras too. She adjusted her posture slightly, not for appearance, but out of habit. She understood that her actions represented more than just herself. Every movement mattered, especially in moments that could later be replayed or discussed. The man felt a mix of pride and responsibility. He knew that how he acted reflected not only on himself, but on the message he supported. The earlier tension had taught him that staying calm did not weaken his voice. It strengthened it. A brief pause in chanting allowed silence to fill the space. In that silence, city sounds returned clearly. Distant traffic, footsteps, and the hum of daily life reminded everyone that the world outside the protest continued to move. This moment was important, but it existed within a larger flow of life. The officer took a slow breath. Her feet ached slightly, but she stayed grounded. She thought about how many different stories stood in front of her. Each person in the crowd carried a past, a reason, a hope. She did not know their details, but she respected their presence. The man caught sight of the officer again. This time, instead of tension, he felt something closer to understanding. They were both standing in the same space, under the same sky, carrying different duties. The thought softened something inside him. The protest organizers signaled for the crowd to shift slightly, creating more space near the street. People responded smoothly, moving together without resistance. The cooperation showed how much the mood had matured since the earlier moments. The officer watched this movement carefully and felt a quiet sense of relief. Cooperation meant trust, even if it was limited. Trust reduced risk. Risk reduction was success in her work. As the afternoon light slowly changed, shadows stretched longer across the ground. The protest began to feel like it was approaching its final phase. People still stood strong, but there was a sense of closure forming. The man lowered his sign briefly and wiped his face. He felt tired but not defeated. He felt heard, even if nothing visible had changed. Sometimes presence itself was the message. The officer remained attentive, ready until the very end. She knew that the final moments of any gathering could be just as important as the beginning. Fatigue could cause mistakes. Calm focus was still needed. Both stood where they were, shaped by the same event in different ways. Neither spoke to the other again, but something unspoken had passed between them earlier, and it remained. The protest continued calmly, moving slowly toward its conclusion, guided by patience, awareness, and the shared effort to keep peace in a space filled with strong emotion. As the day slowly moved toward evening, the protest began to change in a gentle, natural way. The energy that had once been loud and fast became quieter and deeper. People were still standing, still holding signs, but their movements were slower now. Voices softened, not because belief had faded, but because bodies were tired. The message, however, remained strong. The man felt the weight of the long day settle into his legs and shoulders. He shifted his sign from one hand to the other and took a deep breath. Looking around, he saw familiar faces from earlier in the protest. Some smiled softly at each other, sharing a sense of connection that did not need words. They had stood together through emotion, tension, and long hours. That alone meant something. He thought again about the moment near the horse. Earlier, it had felt heavy and uncomfortable. Now, with time and distance, it felt like a lesson. He realized that standing for a cause did not always look the way he imagined. Sometimes it meant stepping back instead of forward. Sometimes it meant listening instead of speaking. That understanding did not weaken his belief. It shaped it. Nearby, the female officer remained at her post. Her posture was still firm, but her expression had softened slightly with the passing hours. She could feel the tiredness in her feet and back, yet her focus stayed clear. She had watched the protest from beginning to near its end, seeing moments of emotion, calm, tension, and cooperation. From her view, this gathering had stayed controlled, and that mattered. She glanced at the horse beside her. The animal had remained calm throughout the day, responding well to guidance and space. She gently patted its side, a small gesture of reassurance. The horse lowered its head slightly, relaxed. That small moment brought her a sense of quiet satisfaction. The crowd began to thin as some people chose to leave. They did so calmly, folding signs, placing them under their arms, and walking away in small groups. There was no rush. No one pushed. The protest did not end suddenly. It slowly released itself back into the city. The man watched as people began to leave. He felt a mix of emotions. Part of him wished to stay longer, to hold onto the moment. Another part knew that knowing when to step away was just as important. He lowered his sign and rested it against his leg. He took one last look at the street filled with people who had shared this experience. As he turned slightly, his eyes met the officer's direction once more. This time, there was no tension in his chest, only acknowledgement. He did not wave or speak, and neither did she. Still, something quiet passed between them. Recognition of shared space, shared time, and a moment handled without harm. The officer noticed the movement of people leaving and adjusted her stance. She communicated briefly with other officers nearby, confirming that the crowd was dispersing peacefully. This was always a critical moment. The end of gatherings required just as much care as the beginning. She stayed alert, watching for signs of frustration or confusion. None appeared. The city slowly reclaimed the street. Traffic signals blinked steadily. The sound of engines and footsteps grew clearer as chants faded. Shops that had closed their doors earlier began to open again. Life moved forward, gently stitching the protest back into the everyday flow. The man finally decided it was time to leave. He folded his sign carefully, smoothing the edges with his hands. As he walked away, he felt tired but also fulfilled. He had stood for something that mattered to him. He had experienced discomfort, reflection, and growth. He knew that change did not always come quickly or visibly, but moments like this still counted. As he walked down the street, he replayed the day in his mind. The sounds, the faces, the feelings. He knew he would carry this experience with him. It would shape how he spoke, how he listened, and how he stood in the future. Behind him, the officer remained until the area was nearly clear. Only a few people lingered at the edges now. She maintained her position, her duty not finished until the space was fully calm. When the final group left, she finally allowed herself a deeper breath. She thought briefly about the many roles she had played that day: protector, guide, observer. She had given instructions, listened, and stayed calm under pressure. She knew not everyone would understand her actions, but she believed she had acted with fairness and care. As the last signs disappeared from view, she turned her attention fully back to her team and surroundings. The street was quiet again, almost unchanged to someone who had not witnessed the day's events. But she knew something important had taken place there. The horse shifted gently, and she adjusted the reins one final time before preparing to move. The long day was coming to an end. The protest did not end with loud conclusions or dramatic moments. It ended with people walking away, carrying their beliefs with them. It ended with understanding, reflection, and restraint. For the man, the day became a memory that would guide him forward. For the officer, it became another chapter in a long, responsibility-filled journey. They did not exchange names or words, but they shared a moment shaped by respect and calm choices. The street returned to normal, but the impact of the day remained within those who had stood there. And in that quiet ending, the story found its meaning.